David Dodge, man, it's always good to have you on the show. We've done a few of these. I really enjoy getting you on here as I get to know you better every time we meet up every 3 or 4 months. We're in one of the same masterminds. And dude, I got to say, when it comes to the BRRRR strategy, you are the go-to guy because I'll tell you what, that has impacted my net worth more than anything I've done. The BRRRR, doing the BRRRR and having the equity, bar none. That's when the net worth started to go up substantially, is because of that, bro. So I got to thank you for that. I do have your book on my shelf in the other room. Nice. And I'm looking forward to chopping it up, man, because I'm in the trenches doing the BRRRR. We have listeners who are doing the BRRRR. You're the go-to guy. So before we get into all the meat and potatoes, tell us a little bit about how you got into the BRRRR strategy, because you've been on the show twice, so people have probably heard your backstory. What got you into the BRRRR strategy, and like how long have you been doing it for? Because it's gotten pretty popular over the last like 3 or 4 years, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I went full-time into real estate about 8 years ago, give or take at this point. In the first 3 years, really maybe, 3.5, maybe even 4. I'd say 3.5. I was exclusively wholesaling. We were just learning about motivated seller marketing, and we were wholesaling, and we did a ton of deals. But for the most part, we don't do anything virtual. We haven't, and we don't currently. We've considered it in the past, but because of that, the wholesale deals that we were doing locally, and I live in the Midwest, I'm out of St. Louis, Missouri, they, you kind of have a ceiling on how much you can wholesale a deal for. Maybe not a ceiling, but the average deal spreads here in St. Louis, they used to be a little higher. I'd say maybe somewhere between 12 and 20 grand. So call it, 15, 16. Recently, I'd say over the last, couple years, that number has probably been cut in half.
Oh, wow.
The average deal that we're doing, in St. Louis, the wholesale side of things is probably somewhere around 7,000 to 10,000. And after all the marketing and all of the, overhead and, commissions or payment to your team, all that stuff. Yeah.
It adds up, dude. Totally.
Oh my goodness.
I'm there.
It adds up. So to just kind of cut to the chase here, I really felt like I was on the transaction treadmill, to where I was just doing a bunch of deals and barely making any money, keeping the business going and keeping everybody paid and keeping the lights on. But what is the point of owning and operating a business just to own and operate a business? Like, the definition of business, in fact, is it's the process of making money, right? Like,
correct.
Like the act of making money. That's what business means. So for the most part, we just kind of got tired of spinning our wheels. We really weren't feeling like there was a whole lot of, growth happening. So about 4, maybe even 5 years ago, we were like, all right, let's start buying rentals and let's start playing around with this method called the BRRRR method, which I had heard about over the previous few, but we didn't really do a whole lot with it. And, the first 10 to 20 we did, we were still leaving in, roughly 15 to 20 grand in a property, which is better than 30 or 40. Let's be honest. But, you do 10 of them and you leave 20 grand in a property, that's 200 grand. And we did that, and we basically dug ourselves into a hole that was about $750,000 deep. We had 90 units. Now, we had, I think it was like 80 plus single family homes and then a couple, little multis here and there. And, but because we were leaving so much money in those, we kind of dug ourselves into, a pretty big hole with our line of credit. And, we kind of had to do a little reset, and we went from 90 doors down to 30. We sold off a bunch of properties. I had to buy out one of my partners, had to pay off that line of credit, and we did. So we kind of did a little reset, and we're like, all right, BRRRR has been great. Let's keep doing it, but let's refine it and let's try to master it. Like, because the goal would be to acquire an asset with no money out of pocket in the end, or little to no money.
Couple grand here and there. Yeah, but not.
Yeah, and
not
I don't
like
have a problem leaving in a couple thousand, but like, and even leaving in 10 or 15 isn't the end of the world. But if you're doing that often, it's going to add up. take it from me. It added up to almost
it happened for me too.
Yeah. Almost to 300, $750,000. So over the last, 4 to 5 years, we've really just been doing everything we can to hone that skill. And we've probably done about 200 of them at this point. We don't own 200 properties because we've sold some off turnkey. We've done portfolio rebalancing, when neighborhoods are declining, we don't really want to be in those neighborhoods. So, we'll sell those off. And occasionally, things will get tight and we'll just say, hey, we got 30, 40 grand worth of equity in this one. Let's just sell it, or as they vacate, sometimes we're like, hey, let's capture some gains. So I've done about 200 BRRRRs over the years. And, it took us probably, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 60 and 80 of them to really kind of get it honed in to where we were doing it with very, very little money. And in some cases, no money. Let's just jump ahead, Greg. I don't want to bore the audience here. Now the goal.
This is awesome, bro. This is like music. You're like the preacher at the church, man. This is good. Good stuff.
So now, we've mastered it. Or at least I would like to think so. We've mastered it. So the goal has always been, no money left in the deal. And that's what we are doing, 80, 90% of the time. Of course, there's, that 1 or 2 out of 10 where we may have to leave a couple thousand in, but even the ones that we have to leave a couple thousand in, it's typically no more than like 4,000 or 5,000. I would say the average at this point is maybe about $1,200, give or take, left in a deal. So after, a couple months of cash flow, you're really in at zero. Yeah. But if you can be all in at zero at refi, then you don't even have to use cash flow to pay it back, and you're doing great.
Infinite
return. Say that again.
Infinite return,
essentially. Yeah. Cause you don't have any money invested in the asset. So, our minimums typically are 300 cash flow. We really shoot for 4 to 5, but we want to see at least 300 cash flow, and we want to see at least 20 to 25,000 in equity. So if we can't achieve, at least 20 grand, ideally more, but at least 20 grand in equity and at least $300 a month in cash flow, it doesn't really make sense for us. So, we're probably averaging closer to 400 to 450 in cash flow and closer to 30,000, if not higher, in equity at this point. Okay. So it's definitely, been worth all of the trial and error.
Yeah. That's insane, bro. I'll tell you what, I follow a similar strategy where the cash flow I look at hard, because like, better than anyone. Dude, I got some tenants, man. They'll just keep calling you. And if you get that call once a week or once a month, replace this, replace that. If you're cash flowing $100 a month, man, you're not, it's going to end up washing you out. But if you're cash flowing $300, $400, $500, $600 a month, if you got to replace a water heater for $700, it's 2.5 months of cash flow, and that's fine. Right. And that's going to be something you don't have to replace. And I see people get into BRRRR deals in my market, which is expensive, and they don't cash flow that well. And they're like, and I tell them, I'm like, you should sell this. You should sell this. You have 20 grand in the deal. You're not making any money. Probably could use the money, and who can't use more money? Mm-hmm. And I look hard at that. And that's what a lot of listeners need to understand is at the rental game, at the end of the day, the equity will build the wealth. But if the property can't produce a substantial cash flow, I don't like to keep those things because they're
not at all.
Too much headache.
Yeah, I think we maybe have one property in our portfolio. So right now, Greg, we're sitting at 92 units.
That's incredible, buddy.
So roughly 60 of those are single family homes, and then the other 32-ish are our multifamily units. So not all in one complex, of course. We have some 2s and some 3s and some 4s, and then we have a larger one that's 20 plus units as well. But for the most part, out of that entire portfolio, we have one property with negative cash flow, and I think we lose $60 a month on it. And the only reason that we even have that one in the portfolio is we bought it rented. And we knew that once that lease expired, we could, increase the rents. There was equity, we could sell it. But I agree 100%. If you're not cash flowing, I'm not a speculator. If you live on the coast, I know that a lot of investors on the coast, that's how they invest. They're willing to break even or lose a couple hundred a month to maybe make 50 or 100 grand in 2-3 years. And, some people, that's okay. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like I just don't speculate. And I'm in the Midwest, so my market's relatively cheap or, cost effective, I guess would be another way to say that. But yeah, so for the most part, you had mentioned that, if your cash flow is low and you have maintenance or capital expenditures, it's going to hurt, it's going to suck. So one of my favorite things about the BRRRR method, Greg, and I probably don't say this enough, but we're buying properties at a discount. That's very, very important. But because we're able to get properties at a discount, they often need work and they often need quite a bit of work. And I don't really want to go buy rental properties that are going to need like a bunch of work or a bunch of it's capital expenditures in the immediate future. So one of my favorite things about BRRRR is the fact that when we buy the property and then we go to rehab it, we're trying our best to eliminate as much of that CapEx right out the gate as we possibly can. Now, you're never going to eliminate it completely because things happen. Roofs and HVACs, they only last for so long. Water heaters, all the above. Like they have a shelf life, but if you can start all of those shelf lives at day one or, right away, like brand new, you're going to defer and deter a lot of that capital expenditures, at least for the first, 5 to 7 years, ideally longer. But, I don't want to be too optimistic. Stuff happens. You get hail damage or, you don't change the filter and, in your HVAC or whatever. Maybe you have a hard water in your area and your water heater just gets clogged. I mean, things are obviously going to happen, but one thing we do want to try to prevent is buying a deal and then having, a $7,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 cost come out of left field on year 2 or 3 or 4. Yeah. Because
buddy,
that will hurt you. That's basically,
that's your problem.
All of your cash flow is going to get wiped clean off the slate, if that happens.
Yeah, dude, that is huge. And that's why I like the BRRRR, because when you said buy it at a discount, that is probably the most important part, because that controls everything else stems from that. It's like building the foundation and then you go up from there. When you can put in, like you said, those major ticket items, it's not the carpet, the paint, that's shit easy. That's cheap, easy, fixable. But water heaters, roofs, major plumbing, major things that are really important to the tenant safety. Because listen, I wouldn't say I don't rent to Taj Mahal to people. I have one property that's a dog shed, but the guy doesn't care and he wants to stay and it's cheap. So he doesn't care. And if I fixed it, it would look like shit a month later, right? It's the way it is. I doubt he's listening. But the big ticket items is where, I see a lot of people, they'll buy like a shitty deal on the market at retail with deferred maintenance. And then, they're making $600 a month. Roof has to get replaced. Permit, there's got a permit that hasn't been pulled, and you're done. Like you're done. You have to then pay money to keep the property. So the emphasis of buying and then improving the rentals before you refi, which we'll cover in a minute, is big. So let's just walk through the quick rehab. I know like you have lots of properties. So when you're going into a BRRRR deal, obviously, let's say you get it at the right number, you got your game plan set up. What are, besides the obvious capital improvements, how do you harden the asset from the inside without the major stuff? Because that's self-explanatory. What are you doing in terms of finishes and also like just the finishes? Because I'll give you an example. I do granite in my rentals when I rehab because that does not break. I do LVP usually. That does not get damaged. I'll do the LED lights. Those generally don't get damaged. The low flow toilets, that stuff really prevents the phone. I don't want the phone ringing. When the phone rings, I'm pissed off, right? When the phone doesn't ring, usually they're happy. So what are you guys doing in your rehabs? So you don't go over budget, because we're not doing gut jobs. We're not taking these things and
not typically. I mean, there's been some in the past that we have, but I try to avoid those. You're absolutely right. So, most of the things you said, I don't typically do the granite just because, we have done it in some in the past, but typically, the cabinets are going to get beat up over time, and And then salvaging the granite may or may not work. So, there are some neighborhoods where we will do that because it's going to help increase the rent.
Yes.
But typically, it's just the main items. Like, so you had mentioned a couple things there. You had mentioned like the luxury vinyl plank or, the PVC flooring, right? It's water resistant and it's scratch resistant. Now, yeah, of course it can still get moldy, and of course you can still scratch it if you take a knife to it or something sharp. But for the most part, it's going to help tenant proof the property. Now, another thing too is we're always keeping in mind that, we most likely won't hold these forever, ideally for a very long time. But we're also thinking that at some point in time, we're going to need to sell these properties. So, a lot of people, when they go in, they're going to do just enough. And we don't really have that approach. Instead, it's like, hey, let's make sure we do just enough, and then let's do a little bit more, So again, we're not going into making them like, there's a big difference to rehab a property to move into for you and I, like our personal preferences. And then there's a rehab for a tenant,
Yes.
So the majority of what we spend our rehab budget on is the capital expenditures, right? So, if it needs a roof, 100% of the time, we're going to swap that roof out. And the beautiful thing about a lot of these capital expenditures, Greg, is that it's just one or two phone calls. So like, for example, we have a roofer that will call for roofs. We have an HVAC guy that will call for, the HVACs, the condensers, the line sets, the furnace, the air conditioner, all that stuff's included. He'll also help us with, water heaters, right? You had mentioned plumbing. If it needs plumbing, we're going to go ahead and do that. If there's any electrical issues, we're going to go ahead and do that. And then windows. So you got to also think, like, part of this process is, the way that this works is by refinancing. Like, none of it matters and will work. BRRRR doesn't work without a
That's
bank.
your exit.
That's your exit without a bank on the back end. So you got to think, there's a couple things that the rehab will do for you. Number one, it's going to reduce the CapEx, and we're talking about that. But a couple other things that it's going to do is it's going to increase the amount of rent you can charge because it's fresh. It's going to have updates, and it's going to have a newer roof and maybe some landscaping. Like, it's just going to look good. But that's also going to help with the value of the asset, which relates directly to the appraisal. So you're going to get higher rents, you're going to get a higher appraisal, you're going to reduce the capital expenditures in the immediate future. You're not going to eliminate them, you're just going to reduce them in the immediate future, right? So those are things that we're constantly thinking about. So, in some cases, 60 to 75% of the rehab is the roof, the HVAC, and the windows. And I love doing windows because the appraisers notice them, the tenants notice them. It's going to reduce the cost of the utility bills. It's going to make the appraiser say, wow, these guys, they didn't cut corners. Like, if you put a new roof and new HVAC and you do the flooring and you do a kitchen, but you got these old aluminum windows or even old wood windows that just look bad, their paint's peeling, like, they're going to immediately, you would think, they're going to think, yeah, hey, these guys are cutting corners, right? So, I would rather do the windows and the floors before I do a kitchen and bath, because we can always get in later and do the kitchen and the bath. But the floors are, the floors are everywhere. The kitchen's only in the kitchen. The bath's only in the bath. The floors are everywhere. They're in the entryway. They're in the bedroom. They're in the hallway. They're in the kitchen. They're everywhere. So, if I was to narrow it down to the main things, I mean, it's going to be the roof. It's going to be the HVAC. It's going to be the plumbing and electrical. It's going to be the floors, and it's going to be the windows. So those are the main things. Like, that little short list of, 6, 7 things, whatever that is. We're going to try to do those first. And then if we have money left over in the budget, we will go in and we'll do the cabinets and the countertops and the vanities and so on and so forth. Now, another thing that we do like to do on almost every one of them, because again, it's going to increase the rents and it's going to increase the value, which relates to the appraisal, is like light fixtures. Light fixtures are so incredibly cheap. You can get a ceiling fan for like $70, maybe even less. Sometimes they're on sale for like $59. So we're going to put fans in all the bedrooms. And if they don't have a light in the bedroom, we're going to run one. You know what I'm saying? Because personally, I like a fan when I sleep. Most people do. And I don't want, them to have to plug in a lamp on the wall to use the light. It's for safety. It's for convenience. People like it. Appraisers like it. Tenants like it. Yep. So we're going to do that. And then plumbing fixtures is another thing that's relatively cost effective. But, whenever somebody goes in, like, especially a woman with kids, even more so, especially when they're looking at the kitchen, they may look past the cabinets being a little dated. They may look past the countertops having a couple nicks and chips in them. But if the faucet looks like crap, they're going to be using that faucet a ton to cook the meals, not only for themselves, but for their family. So it's like, put in a decent faucet for people, not only in the kitchen, but in the bathroom. So the plumbing fixtures and the light fixtures, we don't typically skimp on, right? Of course, if it needs a kitchen or a bath, we'll do those things, but those things don't typically affect the value and or the amount of rent as much as the other things. Even though the tenants don't really care about the roof, they do care about the curb appeal. You know what I'm saying? So like, and that's another thing too. Like, if we're going to get an appraisal on a property, we're going to typically go lay some new mulch. Like, again, that's not going to necessarily make the tenant's life any better, but when they pull up and they see that there's new mulch, it looks fresh, it looks clean. They're going to appreciate that. Well, guess who else appreciates that? The appraiser, the bank. You know what I'm saying? So, it's kind of weird to think, but like the kitchens and the bath are really far low down on the list because, they're not necessarily that expensive. And there's also ways to, update a kitchen without completely gutting it. Same with the bathroom. You can put in a new vanity and you can paint. Maybe the toilet's okay. Maybe the shower is okay. You don't necessarily have to go gut all that stuff out. So lots of things to consider. But for the most part, we like to do the big items because it's going to help with the rent. It's going to help with the appraisal. But really, more so than those two things, which are obviously very, very important, it's going to prevent coming out of pocket in the near future, which we've mentioned a few times. So just wanted to reduce that capital expenditure, makes for you owning an asset that will remain an asset versus an asset that's only going to be an asset for 18 or 24 months. And then all of a sudden it's a big liability. Yeah. You're throwing a bunch of money into it and you're going to have to, either use the cash flow that you've saved up, or maybe it's future cash flow. Yep. Sometimes you may get into a hole, and we haven't been in this situation in quite some time, of course, but in the beginning, it's like, if you don't have the 10 or 15 grand for the CapEx, you're putting that on a credit card. Well, then all of a sudden you're taking cash flow to pay that credit card off, and it may double the time because of the high interest to be able to get the damn thing paid off. So it's like,
it turns into a vortex of shit, dude.
A vortex of shit. Right.
Yeah, you get in trouble. Oh,
absolutely. So, lots of these little things is what we've kind of learned over the last 4 or 5 years of mastering this, and ideally we will do the kitchen and the bath. I don't want to discount that to the listeners here to think that we don't do those things. Well, of course we will. But if I can get away with doing a countertop versus cabinets and countertop, we're going to do that, because I'd rather the majority of my rehab budget go to these bigger items. Like, we can get in and do cabinets in a weekend. You know what I'm saying? But like getting a permit to do an HVAC or something like that may take more time. So we're going to want to try to knock that stuff out. Water heater too, right? Whatever it may be, plumbing, electrical, those are going to take more time. And sometimes it may take a week or 2 or 3 to get the damn inspector out. And that means that it's going to be vacant, assuming that it is already, it's going to remain vacant for longer. Whereas, if it needs cabinets, like we could turn that over really quickly. So just some pro tips from, what I've learned over the years, right there.
After doing a few properties, to say the least.
That's right.
So let's cover the last part of the BRRRR that is critical, and we can spend some time on this, is the refinance, because that's where people get blown out of the water. That's where a lot of people just get absolutely blown out of the water. They don't know who to go to. They don't do it the right way. And that's how they end up leaving 20 grand at the deal, 30 grand at the deal. And then all of a sudden you might as well just go get a 20% down.
Exactly. Might as well just buy something brand new. Right. At that point.
You might as well buy a turnkey rental or something, Screw it. You got no. So what do you do for refis? I mean, how do you approach it? What do you coach your clients on?
I'm glad that you're asking, Greg, because here's the thing. And I teach this to all of my students here, right? And it's in that book that you have of mine as well, too. But really, we refer to the method as the BRRRR method. But my partner, Mike, and I kind of put a little spin on it. And it's really the BRRRR method, which sounds awful. It's like the worst, right? But that P goes in front of the B, and it stands for pre-qualification. So the last thing that I want to do is the last thing I want to do personally and or, teach and educate a student or a listener to this podcast is to go buy a deal, borrow money to do so, rehab it with borrowed money or their own money, get it rented, and then get stuck. So the refinance is really the first and the last piece. You want to go get approved, right? You want to make sure that you're not going to get stuck. And if you don't get approved, well, then maybe BRRRR isn't right today. Doesn't mean, never. It just means maybe you might want to focus on, seller finance or subject to until you're able to qualify for the refinance. So step one is to get pre-qualified, and then the very last step is to then take it to that lender that pre-qualified you and get the loan, right? So very, very, very important. Get pre-qualified. That is the very, very first step. And if you're listening and you're brand new, don't overthink that. Like, you probably have a friend that's a mortgage broker. Reach out to them, make a couple posts on Facebook or social media, just saying, hey, I'm looking to, find a lender that can help me acquire some rental properties, ideally with refinances, not purchases. And you'll probably have 5 or 10 people just send you a message saying, oh, I do that, or my cousin does that. Another approach, my personal favorite, is go to RIAs and find other landlords and other guys like Greg and Dave here, myself, that are doing this already, and say, hey, what lender are you working with? Because that lender obviously knows BRRRR. They know what you're doing, and they're going to be willing to work with you too. And then last but not least would be to actually just start walking in banks. And like all of these are equally valuable. I don't say last but not least, like do that last. Like all of these are equally valuable. But I like to rely on my friends and my acquaintances and my network to kind of tee me up with with relationships and people that they're working with, so I can prevent having to go talk to 300 people to find the 3 or 4 or 5 people that I want to work with, right? So definitely rely heavily on your network. And if you don't have a network, go build one at a RIA, right?
Absolutely.
It's super easy, but again, don't discount walking into the bank. So here's one pro tip for all the listeners. I don't want to be negative towards these banks, but I don't work with them. And there's a reason. So like the big banks, right? I can name a couple of them. You got Bank of America, you got US Bank, you got Wells Fargo, you got Chase, and there's probably 10 or 15 other big national, maybe even global banks, right? Yeah. I personally don't like to work with those because those loans aren't portfolio loans, meaning that they're not going to hold those loans in house. They may sell them off, right? So I like to work with banks that are going to keep the loan and they're going to service that loan in-house. They don't have any intentions of selling it off on Wall Street. Additionally, I don't like those banks, the big ones, of course, because the process of underwriting, the process of due diligence, the process of actually getting to the closing table takes a lot longer. And there's a lot of moving parts involved. Like you may, submit your application online, and then you get a call from a guy out of a Phoenix call center that's going to tee you up with another guy in Minnesota. And then there's a underwriting department in Tampa. You're bouncing all over the place. And you have all these different points of contact. And here's the thing. If you want to navigate that, by all means, I wish you the best. Go for it. I'm not necessarily telling you that that's not going to work. It probably will. But personally, I don't like the hassle. So how do you avoid that? You're probably thinking, sure, here's how. Find your local banks, your local credit unions.
That is a nugget, bro.
A big nugget, because, like personally, I know either the president, the vice president, or the head of the local lending department. And I'll either have their email or their cell phone, or I can drive to the bank and I know they work in the back left office.
Yes.
Right. So if there's an issue, the line of communication is much shorter. It's sometimes instant, ideally. And it's just going to reduce a lot of headaches. The underwriting is going to be more straightforward. Also, whenever you build a relationship with these local banks or credit unions, they're going to have a file on you. So they're going to have your taxes, and they're going to have all of your rent rolls if you already have properties, and they're going to have your W-2s or your 1099s or your K-1s or, whatever it is that they may need. So when you go back for the second or third, or in my case, the 50th loan with that particular person, it's like clockwork now. So it's going to speed things up, not only in the short term, in the immediate, but it's going to speed things up in the future when you're doing that 10th deal or that 30th deal with them as well. So how do I define local? Well, if you can drive to that bank in 20 or 30 minutes, that's local. And another thing is you don't want to work with, so, I mentioned earlier, I try to avoid the big banks. Well, I also try to avoid, the regional banks. So the ideal avatar, I guess would be the right word for a bank, would be a bank that's got less than 20 branches. Now, could you do it with one that's got 30? Of course. Could you do it with one that's got 50? Of course. But, the sweet spot from what we found is like 3 to 15. They have at least 3 branches. They're big enough to be lending and growing and willing to work with you as in the investor. And if they have somewhere between 3 and 15, that's really the sweet spot. And it doesn't have to be just banks. We work with credit unions too. Credit unions actually can be just as good, if not better, because they're not necessarily for profit, like they are, but it's for profit for the community of the union, right? It's not for the profit of, shareholders per se. I guess the credit union, the members are the shareholders, but you know what I mean? It's not like they're out there just trying to make as much money as they can. Instead, they're just trying to make a little bit of money, but at the same time, make everybody happy and keep their people employed and, and offer the services that these banks and credit unions offer. So yeah, hopefully that was valuable.
That's golden. I got to tell you, bro, I got a recommendation from my septic guy for a local credit union, and man, so much easier to do business with them. They understand it. They don't give a shit. They actually pay for the appraisal once you've done one deal with them. So it basically costs nothing.
It's awesome.
And dude, they don't jerk you around. And if you, this is the thing I love about it. When, like you said earlier, when there's a problem in the line of communication, I call the freaking person who does the damn loans. I'm not calling Rick in Minnesota and he's transferring me to Tom in Washington State. I call the person, I have their cell phone number, and it's not like I'm getting their assistance on the phone, and we figure out the challenge, we come up with a solution, and we move forward versus getting jerked around from, hell's half acre. And it can be a mess. So I have one more follow-up question on the refi part, because obviously getting a discount is the key. What are your thoughts on these hard money companies now offering 30-year fixed products?
I'm working with a couple of them, man. I'm working with a couple of them. And so there's pros and cons, guys. There's pros and cons with everything in life. There's pros and cons, with real estate. There's pros and cons with the weather. Come on, there's pros and cons everywhere. You got to understand that. So the pros are that they're going to lock in both the rate and the term for 20 to 25 or even 30. And I would imagine 40-year loans are going to be right around the corner with all this craziness that's happening in the economy. I haven't seen any yet, but I would imagine they're right around the corner. But to stay on topic, we've probably got 7 to 10 30-year fixed rate and term loans to our LLCs just in the last 6 months. So what one thing I like to preach and educate on is don't put all your eggs in one basket. You definitely want to diversify your banks, your credit unions, and your lenders, just because if something happens at one bank and you have all of your eggs in that basket and they start, wanting to collect their money or whatever, that could be painful to you. So, I love the fact that there are these institutions out there, and the majority of them are hard money lenders. And this is going to kind of contradict what I said earlier, but not really. They do plan on selling those off on the secondary market. But the reason that that's okay is because the rate and term are fixed. So who cares who services the loan if it's fixed? The reason I don't like, these other banks selling the loans off, is they're ideally, they're not going to be fixed. They may be a 3, a 5, or a 7-year balloon. They're not going to renew. So that's another, pro tip here is whenever we are working with the local banks, we're not typically getting a 30-year fixed rate. They may give us a 20, 25, or in some cases, maybe a 30-year amortization. But the term of the loan, the rate of the loan is typically going to be 3 to 5. And I used to even get offered 7 until about 2 months ago. And they were like, nope, 3 and 5. It's just too risky right now to go that far. But the beautiful thing about the local banks and credit unions, Greg, is that, after the fixed rate ends for, let's just say we're going with a 3-year fixed rate over a 20 or 25-year amortization. At the end of the 3 years, you don't owe the loan. The loan isn't called due. What they're going to do is they could in theory, but they don't want to do that. What they want to do is they want to just give you a new rate for an additional 3 to 5 years, right?
Like
so absolutely. So that's very, very important because you're not starting over every time. So I tell my students, I would rather you pay a higher interest rate, than have a balloon at the end of a 3 or 5 or 7 year period, because then you're starting all the way over on your amortization table. And the goal is to have the tenants pay the property off. Well, if you're starting over on amortization even if it's every 5 or 7, it's going to take you like 175 years to pay this property off, because you're just starting over every time, right?
Yeah, you got to restart, and then the interest is high.
Yeah. So I might have got sidetracked though. To answer your question, I like these banks that do the 30 years. The pros are it's fixed. And if they sell it off, who cares? It's fixed. The cons are a couple things. Some of them are offering the 30 years, and in exchange for that, they're going to have a prepayment penalty for either 3 years or 5. Some of the ones I've been working with recently are 5. And the way that they do it is it's 5% year 1, 4, 3, 2, 1. So every year it decreases. So on the 5th year, if you were to, pay that loan off, they're going to charge you a 1% fee, a prepayment penalty. That doesn't bother me because I have a very long-term mindset. So just keep that in mind though. There may be prepayment penalties if you're getting a 30-year loan to an LLC. If you're going and you're getting this in your own personal name, they may not have those fees. You may get a better rate too, but you're going to be subject to some liability. I like the LLCs because it's going to protect you a little bit.
Yeah.
The other thing is, Greg, is that the closing costs are going to be substantially higher. So typically, to go get a loan.
Yeah.
So on average with the local bank, we're going to probably spend, I'm guessing here, somewhere between $1,800 and $2,500, just give or take. It could be different from that, but that's a good rule of thumb, right? And also the local banks, they may or may not escrow your taxes and insurance. I don't like when a bank puts that in my court, because that means I have to prepare for that, right? So I would rather, and some people may disagree, and that's okay. Everyone's got their own opinion.
I love when it's
rather escrow and let them manage it, automate it. The main argument to that, Greg, is, well, why would I want to put my money into this account making no interest to where the bank can use it, and then, I could be making money elsewhere. Well, here's the caveat to that. You could put it in an investment elsewhere and lose it.
Yeah, dude.
Right?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Or you could forget that you need to park money on the side, and then all of a sudden you get $65,000 to $75,000 worth of real estate taxes, like I did this year. I think I owed about 70 grand in real estate tax and
property taxes.
Yeah, same thing. But luckily I had 40 to 50,000 of it parked, so I didn't have to come out of pocket 70 grand.
Yeah,
I had to come up with 20. So one of the things I like about these 30-year guys is typically they will escrow. That's an advantage. Having the rate fixed for 30, that's an advantage. The cons would be the prepayment penalties, and then the other con would be the
closing costs.
The closing costs are going to be more. So I mentioned, $1,800 to $2,500 closing costs on the local banks. These bigger national hard money guys that are doing the 30 years, those closing costs are going to typically be a minimum of 2x, if not 3x. Yeah. So you might have $5 or $6 grand worth of closing costs, but here's a caveat to that. They're often making you prepay escrows, which is fine. I'm okay with that. So it's not like all of that is a fee. Maybe 30% of that is you prepaying escrows. And then the only other, con I can see, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something to be aware of, is that they're going to want to typically see anywhere from 8 to 12 to 14 months worth of reserves. So if the mortgage payment is $1,000, they're going to want to see that you're going to have at least $8,000 to $15,000 in that LLC's operating account, or maybe it's another operating account that owns that LLC. but it can't be non-attached,
Yeah,
right?
it's got to be associated with it.
Yeah. So as long as you have capital reserves, and the thing is that you can't just move that capital reserve into that bank account 3 weeks before closing, or 2 weeks before closing, or 2 days before closing. They want to see like trailing 60 to 90 days that money's been there, and that your business is in fact legit, and that you're not trying to pull the cover over somebody's sheets. So as long as you can comply, as long as you can comply by these things, you're going to be okay. So my partner, Mike, and I, we've been moving more and more into them. We're okay with the higher closing costs. We're okay with the capital reserves. And we actually, in fact, love the fact that we can escrow.
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah, we're leaving a little bit of interest on the table, but we're also, like, again, I'd hate to take that $60,000 or $70,000 that I have to pay in real estate tax and go park it in a stock like Tesla, or more so like Netflix, and then the stock halves, and all of a sudden my 70 grand's worth 35, and it's like, well, how am I going to pay these taxes? So to me, it makes way more sense to escrow, let them deal with it, and then you don't have to worry about the savings or any of that type of stuff.
Dude, that's you have dropped so many.
I talk a lot. I appreciate you listening. This
is like a legit masterclass on BRRRR, dude. This is golden, bro. I just, the listeners are probably like, they're probably just like jaw drop, like just they're gonna definitely, this is gonna be one people are gonna re-listen to, because this is like a legit, like step-by-step tactical.
There's a lot of steps in there.
Yeah, step-by-step. So I know you do teach this at a high level. So if people were interested in finding more about the BRRRR, I know you've recently, as of 2022, launched a BRRRR coaching program. So just talk a little bit about what it is, how it works. And I know you do something that no one else does, which I heard on good old Billy's podcast, where you actually let your clients go on to your, which is awesome. They go on to your team meetings, which is bananas, as they would say.
Yeah.
And, just tell everyone a little bit about what it is and how they can get involved if they were interested in it.
Yeah. So Greg, I really appreciate you taking the time to, have me on today. And I'm really grateful for our friendship and your time and all of the above, man. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate you. So, I've been in this game for about 18 years. I've been full-time at it for 7 or 8. And, my passion over the last 4 to 5 has really just been building my rental portfolio and using the BRRRR method. So in the past, I've coached people on all different types of things, but because my focus and passion is the BRRRR method, it just makes sense for me to just put all of my effort into that. So that is what we coach at this point. It's BRRRR Method Mastery is the name of our program. And you can go to BRRRRmethodmastery.com. It's with 3 R's or 4. We own both the domains, so they'll both go to the same place. So BRRRR Method Mastery is the name of the program, and it's also the domain. And the thing is that we want to help people avoid leaving 30 grand or 20 grand or 15 grand or even 10 grand in a property. We want to show them how to do so the right way and not make the mistakes that we made for years and years and years, refining the process. My goal is to get somebody into, little to no money, in their first couple deals, right? So that's really the passion. That's the goal. And I just love it, man. I love helping people. But the cool thing too, though, is you got to think, BRRRR isn't just something that you can do in a day or a weekend or a week, and oftentimes not even in a month. It is a process. Yeah. So, in theory, it's 4 programs in one, if you think about it, because, one of the main things, and we've both mentioned this several times now. So guys, if this has gone right over your head, you really want to listen this 4th or 5th time that we say this, but buying at a discount is so incredibly important. I mean, it's probably one of the most important things outside of getting pre-approved.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you don't get pre-approved, you're going to get stuck. But if you don't buy a deal, then it's very difficult for you to be all into that deal for little to no money. So number one, you're going to have to buy. So buying in itself is it's a whole coaching program. It's what kind of marketing to do and how to negotiate and how to send the offers and, what to do to get the deal. And then the next step, obviously, is the rehab. And, we talked a lot about that on this episode today, but, it's one of these things where I can't just tell somebody what to do. It's really more so like, hey, show me the deal you're looking at. Let me help you, with the rehab. Let me help you with the repair estimates, and let me help you with the contractor agreements and, all that type of stuff. Right. So the rehab in itself is kind of its own program, but it's all mixed into the same, of course. And then the next is the management. Are you going to manage? I did it myself for 12 years. I can give you all the paperwork that I used and you can go hit the ground running, or we can help you collectively find a local property manager and interview that person and figure out, the pros and cons of working with them. And maybe that's what you want to do. That's what I like to do at this point, because my time is more valuable than income. I like my time. So that's the third part. And then the fourth is the exit. It's the banks, it's the credit unions, it's the refinance, it's the lending. And really some of that even kind of rolls into the hard money or the private money to even get into these deals, right? So essentially there's 4 programs in one. And to kind of sum that up, Greg, you had mentioned one of the things that we do, which is kind of unique to our program. And I think it's tremendous. I really do. I think that's a really great word for this, because it provides so much additional value. So what is it? Here's what it is. We do 2 calls a week, not one. A lot of coaches will do one every other week, or, maybe once a month. No, I don't believe in that. Whenever somebody wants to hire me or work with me, I want them to walk away with, holy cow, that the amount of value that's being given here is like crazy. I should have paid 10 times this amount.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, we do 2 things. Number one, we do 2 calls a week versus 1 a week or 1 every other week, 2 a week. So Mondays and Thursdays, no matter what, we get on with our students. But here's the second part of that. We actually run our meetings in the first hour of that. So I essentially invite all of the active students in the program to be a fly on the wall so they can see my business. And we're wholesaling, we're fixing, flipping, and we're buying rentals and using the BRRRR method. So every step of the way, we're not just teaching, they can be a fly on the wall and they can see, okay, Dave found this deal from this type of marketing, and this is how he got the deal under contract. Next, Dave and his team are going to call and contact his private or hard money lenders. They're going to present the deal and they can watch us do it. And then we either get approved or we don't. And it's rare that we don't, because we've built great relationships. But then, okay, that step's done. Now they're going to go to the closing table. Next, they're going to put together a rehab plan. Next, they're going to rehab that property. And there's always going to be something, a hiccup here or a hiccup there. They get to watch and listen to all of that stuff. And then the property management. Hey, what's being rented or what's being leased? Hey, what evictions are we dealing with right now? What maintenance is out there? They get to see it all. And then last but not least, what banks we're using. And it's not all just hyper local to me in the Midwest. You had mentioned we do work with some of the hard money lenders that will do the 30s, and they can kind of see in on what's happening. So we basically do 2 hours twice a week. The first hour, they can be a fly on the wall. And again, we've done about 200 BRRRRs right now. I think we have 8 or 9 going. So we always have at least a few. And there's usually there's a couple in each stage. There's a couple we're buying, a couple we're rehabbing, a couple that's either being leased or turned, and then a couple that we're waiting to refinance. So the first hour is that. And then the second hour is either instruction or open Q&A. And there's another cool, benefit here, Greg, is that I don't have a hard stop after that second hour. If we have interaction and good engagement and good questions, I've been known to stick around for 2 or even 3 hours on these calls, because I just want to help. Like, I'm truly passionate about seeing my students succeed and find success, because their success ultimately is my success. So that's kind of a general, overview of how that works.
Dude, I got to say, man, I know you very well. You are one of the biggest givers, if not the biggest giver I know, because I know you personally, and I know you would literally be on there for 5 hours if you had to freaking help.
And there's been times where I will and have. Yeah.
I believe it, brother. You are something special, bro. I seriously mean that. I could tell that passion to help people, that passion lined up with the knowledge and the experience you have is a recipe for stratosphere success, man. So I love talking with you, brother. So happy to call you a friend and a good friend, that. And if people want to check, yeah, man, it's been great. It's always good kicking with you every couple months. So if people want to check it out, BRRRR Method Mastery, BRRRR or BRRRR.
3 R's or 4 R's. Yeah, don't do the 2. I don't have that one. I should probably get that one.
Okay, so BRRRR Method. We'll have this in the show notes. My assistant will put it in there. And if people want to follow you online, Dave, if they want to connect with you on social, what's the best Instagram handle to follow you at?
Instagram's probably my go-to. I don't spend that much time on social media, guys, but definitely reach out. I'm happy to chat with you. My handle is my full name, spelled all the way out. So David Allen Dodge. David's pretty self-explanatory. Allen is spelled A-L-A-N, because there's a couple different ways you can spell that. And then Dodge, just like the car, Dodge. So David Allen Dodge over on IG. Hit me up, send me a message. I'd love to chat with you.
Love it, David. Dude, awesome chopping it up with you. And this is going to be a good show, brother. I got a good feeling about it.
I love it. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me, brother.